Hey guys, what's going on? So today I had a chance to finally test out the open beta of Battlefield 5, and in this video we're going to look at how the game runs on different hardware and at different quality presets, so you guys know pretty much what to expect when the game launches later this year. Now, although this is the beta version of the game, I think the performance will largely stay the same since we are working with fully completed maps which more or less look finished, and the game runs as you would expect with a full 64-player server. And although this is a completely new game in the Battlefield franchise, it is built on the same Frostbite game engine, and this means that it does retain that Battlefield 1 look that most players are familiar with, but after testing it, I'd definitely be comfortable saying that it's at least 15% harder to run. For testing, we are pretty limited here when it comes to repeatability between benchmark runs, since we are limited to an online multiplayer setting, and so the margin of error is definitely a lot higher than I'd like. So for a change of pace, I'm going to be a little bit more relaxed with this one, and let's start by looking at 3 different system configurations and see how they run at 1080p and 1440p. The budget configuration is the i3-8100, the 1050 Ti and 8GB of memory. The mainstream configuration I tested is the i5-8400, GTX 1070 and 16GB of memory. And lastly is the Enthusiast setup with an 8700K, 1080 Ti and also 16GB of memory. The i3 and 1050 Ti played pretty rough at ultra settings and 1080p, so I would recommend around medium settings there for a decent playing experience. The i5 and GTX 1070 was much better, but still not what I expected personally, under 100 FPS on average here at 1080p, and even a top tier configuration with an i7 and 1080 Ti will just be able to keep up with a 144Hz monitor on average, and remember this is at 1080p. At 1440p, the budget configuration is out of the question as you would expect unless you want motion sickness. The mainstream setup felt playable with just over 60 FPS on average, and the 1080 Ti and i7 was much better at above 106 FPS on average. Now, performance overall is okay, it's just that the game is running significantly worse than previous Battlefield titles that I've played and tested, so hopefully we can see some optimization for the final release. Now, something that's worth mentioning is that CPU usage in Battlefield 5 is very high, even more so than Battlefield 1. Since the game is working with a 64-player server, handling a lot of game logic and typically running at high refresh rates, even the 6-core i5-8400 was hitting 100% utilization at times, which did cause micro stutter here and there. I'm very interested to see how the Ryzen 5 and Ryzen 7 CPUs perform here, but that will have to wait until the final release. The quad-core i3 was pretty much pinned at 90 and 100% also, so just keep that in mind. Battlefield 5 is also fairly memory intensive as well, comfortably eating up 9 to 10GB of RAM if it's on the menu, and this meant that our budget configuration with 8GB of memory wasn't performing great in terms of frame rate stability, and I also tested 8GB versus 16GB on the i7 and 1080 Ti and saw around a 15% reduction in frame rate on average. So if you're planning on playing BF5 with 8GB of RAM, don't expect the best of times. There is a large gain in average and 1% FPS to be had when jumping up to 16 gigs. Alright, so now let's talk about the quality presets, because all of the testing so far has been at ultra settings. All testing was completed with the cinematic effects like vignetting, film grain, chromatic aberration, and of course motion blur turned off. They not only make the game run worse, but in my opinion look worse as well. So in terms of quality presets and performance, we're looking at the 1080 Ti in 1440p here, and there really is a massive difference here between ultra and low. Even dropping things down to the medium preset will net you close to a 40 FPS bump with this configuration, and in my opinion that trade-off is totally worth it. The visual fidelity between ultra and medium quality preset is questionable also at best, and that's even when trying to look for the subtle differences between them. It becomes even more questionable when actually playing the game. The bottom line is that the game still looks incredible at medium settings for a significant improvement in frame rate. So as I said in the intro, Battlefield 5 is at least 15% harder to run in terms of frame rate when compared to the previous Battlefield title, BF1. For example, those who enjoyed around 120 FPS on average on their GTX 1070s in Battlefield 1 at 1080p will now be looking at around 90 to 100 FPS at the same quality preset. The budget configuration that we tested, which was the i3-8100 and the GTX 1050 Ti, performed very rough in the game at 1080p, so if that's what you're running, do expect to play at medium or low settings for a decent return in frame rate. So guys, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below on Battlefield 5, and not just the performance aspect, but the overall game itself. As always, a huge thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.